They called my name, and I rose from the third row in a sea of caps and gowns. My palms were damp against the edge of my robe. I could see Dean Hartford waiting at the center of the stage, hand-extended smile ready. I took 2 steps forward, and that's when I heard her voice. She cheated her way through college. It came sharp, slicing through the ceremony like glass. The auditorium froze. My head turned instinctively before I could stop myself. She was standing Callie midway up the aisle, one hand clenched around the program, the other pointed directly at me. She lied. She stole. Ask the registrar if she ever even earned her credits. Gasps fluttered across the room. A couple of people shifted in their seats. Phones came up like reflexes. I felt 400 eyes dart from her to me. My breath caught somewhere between my ribs and my throat. Dean Hartford's hand mid-air slowly lowered. His expression changed, not disbelief, not anger, just concern. The kind that makes you feel 10 years old again. Callie's voice rose louder. She's a fraud, and everyone's just handing her a degree like she didn't lie to get here. My shoes felt stapled to the carpet. For a second, I couldn't tell if my legs had gone numb or if I simply refused to move. Beside me, another graduate whispered, "Oh my God," and somewhere near the back, someone laughed nervously. I swallowed hard. Then I walked. 1 step, then another. Not fast, not slow, just forward. I didn't look back. Dean Hartford didn't move until I reached him. He held out the diploma. My fingers trembled as I took it. "Miss Ellison," he said quietly, "would you like to continue?" I nodded. The microphone stood beside us. I could see its red light blinking live. I turned to the audience, to the phones, to my sister still standing still yelling. And I stepped up to the mic. The whispering didn't stop at first. You could still hear people murmuring, adjusting in their seats, speculating. But then I cleared my throat, and they did. They stopped. I looked across the auditorium, not for defense, not for permission, but because I had something to say. "I've been accused of being a fraud," I said. My voice didn't shake, and I could spend the next 5 minutes trying to prove that I'm not, but I won't. My fingers tightened around the edge of the podium. Because this moment isn't about her. I didn't name her. I didn't have to. This moment is about every paper I wrote at 2 a.m. after closing the cafe. Every exam I studied for after my shift. Every time I didn't quit because I couldn't afford to. I paused. Somewhere a phone clicked into silence. "I'm not here to convince you of anything. I'm here because I earned it." The auditorium went still. Even Callie's voice had gone quiet, or maybe I'd just stopped hearing it. I turned back to Dean Hartford. "Thank you," I said softly, and we shook hands. Then I walked off stage and into the hallway, still holding my diploma like a question I'd finally answered. I didn't cry after the ceremony. Not even when I was alone in the hallway holding a diploma in one hand and a phone buzzing with half-hearted apologies in the other. I just sat on a bench near the exit door's coat draped over my lap, letting the cold air from outside settle on my skin like a reset. Callie's voice still rang in my ears, but the words weren't new. They'd just never been said so loudly. She used to say things like that behind closed doors sarcastically with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Leora always lands on her feet," she'd mutter, or, "You know how it is when you're the golden one." As if getting through college with part-time jobs and rejected FAFSA appeals was some kind of unfair advantage. What she didn't say at graduation was that she had dropped out of law school after 1 semester, that she'd blamed the professors, the cost our mother, everyone but herself. After our dad died, she'd stepped up, briefly paid a few bills, made a few phone calls. She liked being the one who held things together. But as soon as the checks stopped and the grief settled, she vanished. I was 19 when she moved out, leaving a post-it note on the fridge and a box of half-packed dishes. She said she needed space. I needed money. So I stayed enrolled in full-time classes and picked up 2 jobs, morning shifts at a bakery and evenings tutoring high school kids in math. Callie didn't ask how I managed it. She just told people I was the ambitious one. Her voice always curled around the word like it was a slur. What she didn't say at graduation was that I hadn't spoken to her in nearly a year. The last time she called was to ask if she could borrow the password to our dad's old banking app. just to check something she'd said. What she didn't say was that she hadn't congratulated me, not when I got the internship, not when I got the research grant, not once in 4 years. So no, the outburst wasn't surprising. What caught me off guard was the timing. She waited until the mic was on, until the lights were bright, until the moment wasn't hers, just to make sure it wouldn't be mine either. I should have known then that what happened on stage was only the beginning. I stood there for a moment longer after the mic went quiet, the last of my words still hovering in the air. Some lies don't need to be shouted down, I had said. They collapse on their own. A few heads turned toward Callie, now seated again, arms crossed, eyes hard. Others looked at Dean Hartford, who nodded slightly as if to say, "That's enough." Then claps. Not loud, not immediate. Just a handful of people who had waited. A professor in the front row. A classmate I didn't know well. Jess, my roommate, standing and clapping like she was trying to hold up the roof by herself. I didn't bow. I didn't smile. I just walked off stage, diploma in hand, spine straight. It felt like carrying a flag through enemy lines. Outside, the sun was sharp and cold. Families were already spilling out onto the steps, calling names, taking photos. Laughter and camera flashes and someone yelling, "Over here, Grandma." I slipped past them all down the side ramp, past a group of undergrads I didn't recognize. One of them whispered something, and I caught only the word cheated. It wasn't a question. I kept walking until I reached the edge of the quad near the old science building where I used to nap between tutoring sessions. I sat down on a low stone wall and checked my phone. Jess had texted Screw Her. "You were brilliant. Then come meet us later." You don't have to say a word. Just be with people who know. There were others. Professor Klein, proud of you. My TA from Stats. Anyone watching you for the last 4 years knows the truth. One number I didn't recognize. "We've never met. I was in the back row. Just wanted you to know I believed you." I exhaled. Not relief. Just breath. The diploma was still in my lap, warm from my hands. I ran my fingers over the embossed lettering, not to admire it, but to make sure it was still there. Some part of me kept expecting it to disappear, but it didn't. And neither did what came next. I didn't stay at the after-party. I didn't answer Jess's texts or stop by the cafe where my classmates were gathering in caps and sneakers and borrowed joy. I took the bus home diploma tucked in my coat like a secret I wasn't sure I'd earned. Inside my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I just walked straight to the bookshelf and pulled out the bottom drawer, the one with the false back. Behind a stack of notebooks was a locked file pouch, thin gray, unmarked. The key was taped under the drawer. Inside were papers I hadn't looked at in months. Copies of financial aid statements, screenshots of disappearing balances, a typed report with a plain title, Preliminary Findings, Ellison Case. It had started in sophomore year when my scholarship check bounced. The financial aid office had no explanation. An issue with the account, they said, eyes darting, voices low. I didn't qualify for more grants. They suggested a loan. I picked up a second job instead. That same semester, I logged into the old bank account my grandfather had opened for my education. The balance was wrong. Way too low. At first, I thought it was interest or maybe a mistake. Then I saw the withdrawals. $3,500 here, $6,200 there, over and over, always in round numbers. Transfers to a secondary account I didn't recognize. I stared at the screen until it blurred. The only other person who had ever had access to that account was Callie. Our dad had added her when he got sick just in case. He never thought she'd need to be removed. I remembered sitting across from Frankie Dillard for the first time, an ex-cop turned small-town investigator who now specialized in quiet fraud. He didn't flinch when I told him it might be my sister. He took the case. 2 months later, he handed me a file and said, "You're not wrong. But it's worse than you think." Callie had forged my name, bank forms, authorization letters, even my scholarship appeal. Over $28,000 gone. Now with my diploma in one hand and the file in the other, I knew her outburst at graduation wasn't about anger. It was a distraction. She'd spent years stealing from me, and now she was trying to make sure no one believed me when I finally spoke. 2 days after graduation, I walked into Dean Hartford's office with the file pressed flat between my palms. I didn't have an appointment. His assistant hesitated until I said my name. Then she nodded once quietly and waved me through. He stood when I entered, gesturing to the seat across from his desk like we were equals now. "Leora," he said carefully, "I was hoping I'd hear from you." I didn't say anything at first. I just opened the folder and began laying out the documents. One by one, bank statements, forged authorization forms, notarized handwriting comparisons, Frankie's report, the dates, the totals. By the time I placed the last page down, Dean Hartford's expression had shifted from curiosity to something sharper, but not doubt. He looked at me and said, "I saw the way you stood on that stage. I believed you before you even spoke." He leaned back, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "This is serious and very thorough." I nodded. He took a moment, then asked, "What do you want to do with this? I want it on record," I said. "Not just for me. I need someone official to know that what she said wasn't just a lie, it was cover." He picked up one of the documents, read a few lines, then set it down. "I can write a letter confirming your academic integrity and help you submit a report to the university's legal counsel. But this," he tapped the forged bank form, "this is criminal. You should consider going to court." I didn't flinch. I already have a lawyer. I just needed someone to believe me first. "I do," he said simply. He reached for a pen. I watched as he signed his name across the top of the letterhead. The first piece of official truth. Something no whisper could erase. By the time I left the building, I had a signed statement in my bag and a court intake form waiting in my inbox. The paperwork was filed on a Thursday. My lawyer, Samantha Cray, handled the filing with a calm efficiency that felt almost surgical. She was sharp-eyed, soft-voiced, and had already flagged 3 inconsistencies in Callie's bank activity before we even finished the intake forms. Civil fraud, identity theft, financial misappropriation, she'd said, flipping through the binder. "We'll start with the civil case. Criminal referrals come later." That evening, I sat by the window with my phone on the table waiting. At 6:42 p.m., it rang. Her number. I hit record before I picked up. "What the hell is this?" Callie's voice was already raised. "Some stranger just handed me a letter at my door." "Are you insane? Did you read it?" I asked. "Of course I read it." "A lawsuit for what?" "Trying to keep our family from falling apart." I said nothing. "You know I accessed that account to make sure it didn't get wasted. You were too young to manage that money. You weren't even using it right." I didn't respond, just let the silence do its work. "You're seriously doing this," she snapped. "You're dragging me through court because I helped you." "You forged my name," I said quietly. "And you're throwing away everything Dad built over what some stupid account Samantha listened to the recording later that night." She gave us everything she said, nearly smiling. "That's gold in court." I saved the audio and backed it up twice. The next day, Samantha filed the recording as supporting evidence. Callie's voice, so practiced, so sure, sounded different when written out in legal print. Every justification, every half-denial, every word. It was all there now. She had spent years rewriting the story. But this time, the version that counted was mine. The news moved faster than I expected. Within days of the papers being served, I started getting calls numbers I hadn't seen in years lighting up my screen. Aunt Daphne was the first. "I need to talk to you," she said. Her voice was thin, like it had been kept in a drawer too long. "I should have told you earlier. We met at a coffee shop on Willow and 3rd Neutral Ground. She brought a manila envelope and didn't touch her drink. When your dad died, Callie told me you needed time to grieve, that I shouldn't bother you. Then she asked to borrow $8,000 to help with tuition. Said the school was threatening to revoke your spot." I blinked. "She told me you moved away and didn't want contact." Aunt Daphne shook her head. "I wired her the money." Never heard from her again. She opened the envelope bank slips. Old emails, a printed note in Callie's handwriting, thanking her for protecting the family legacy. "I stayed quiet," she said, "because I wanted to believe she was helping you." That night I got a message from Kara, a girl I hadn't talked to since high school. "Hey, weird question. Did you ever get the money I lent Callie?" She said it was for your housing deposit. I gave her $4 my freshman year. There were more, a former tutor, a neighbor from 3 blocks over, each with the same pattern, a version of me in distress. Callie, the loyal sister, stepping in to solve it, just needing a little help, just needing funds. She hadn't been angry at graduation because she thought I cheated. She'd been angry because her cover story was collapsing. This wasn't just resentment, it was theft wrapped in sisterhood. A con built on my silence. She didn't just lie about me, she made me the lie. And now that I was telling the truth, the version of me she'd invented couldn't survive. The courtroom smelled like old paper and cold air. I sat in the front row alone, my hands folded over a plain blue folder. Across the aisle, Callie breezed in wearing a navy suit and heels too high for the polished floors. Her lawyer, all cufflinks and charm, held her elbow like they were walking into a press conference. She didn't look at me. I didn't expect her to. When the hearing began, the judge reviewed everything methodically, line by line. Bank records, signatures, audio, transcripts. My name, her name, the same forms signed in different hands. Callie's lawyer leaned into sympathy, then logic. "This is a misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "An older sister stepping in to help when her sibling wasn't mature enough to manage finances. Any actions taken were out of concern, not deceit." Then Callie took the stand. She spoke about loyalty, about family, about sacrifice, about how she'd shielded me from the burden of money. Her voice was low, almost tender, but the documents didn't bend to her performance. The judge asked her to explain the offshore account in her name, the 5 separate withdrawals after she'd stopped speaking to me, the handwritten notebook found in her apartment filled with my forged signature. Callie didn't have answers. When it was my turn, I said only what mattered. I worked 2 jobs to replace what she stole, I told the court. I didn't file this out of revenge. I filed it because truth deserves more than silence. The room stayed quiet as the judge read the ruling. The court found in my favor. Damages awarded. Referral for criminal review. I didn't look at Callie as I left the room. I didn't need to. That silence. It wasn't empty. It was honest. A week after the ruling, my uncle showed up at my apartment with a manila envelope and an apology he didn't quite know how to give. "This was in your grandfather's desk," he said. "I didn't know he'd written you anything." The envelope was thin, the handwriting unmistakably, his sharp, deliberate, exact. Inside was a single page. "Leora, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong that I hoped never would, but I trust you. Use what's left of this money to create something that can't be stolen, something that will outlast the ones who tried to take it. With all my belief in you, Granddad, I sat on the edge of the couch, the letter in my lap, the court check still sealed on the table beside me. 30 minutes later, I was online researching how to start a nonprofit. The first call I made was to a local legal clinic. The second was to my old professor, the one who always said resilience wasn't just survival, it was strategy. Within a month, the paperwork was filed. I named it the Ellison Resilience Trust, a small foundation, quietly built, meant for women who had lost access to family support emotionally, financially, or both. It would offer micro-grants for college housing deposits, legal aid. Not huge, not flashy, just enough to start. I didn't need to build something that impressed anyone. I needed to build something that restored. And in doing so, I finally felt like I had. 1 year later, I stood behind the same podium where my world had once cracked open. The auditorium looked almost identical, rows of polished chairs, the soft echo of footsteps, the distant hum of the air vents. But this time there was no fear in my throat. No one whispering, no one yelling. This time I'd been invited. The Ellison Resilience Trust had just awarded its first 5 scholarships. One of the recipients, a girl named Maribel, had hugged me so tightly after the announcement I could barely breathe. She reminded me of myself, sharp-eyed, quietly determined, carrying more than she admitted. I was the closing speaker. I didn't read from notes. I stood here once before I began, but not like this. Back then, I was trying to hold myself together while someone tried to tear me apart. Today, I don't need to hold anything together. I'm whole. I spoke about Callie, but briefly. Not to vilify her, but to name the wound. Then, I spoke about what came after. the hours spent building something small but solid, the messages from women who had no one, the dignity of being believed. I'm not here to relive what happened, I said. I'm here because it didn't end me. The room stayed still, not with tension, but with respect. I thought she stole my story. But this mic, it was always mine. Charleston mornings were supposed to be beautiful sunlight scattering across the pastel facades on East Bay Street, the church bells carrying through the narrow lanes, but mine always began the same way, with Celine's footsteps echoing through my front hall. She never knocked. The Whitcombs owned too much of this city to recognize the boundaries of a closed door. I was at the kitchen table, reviewing invoices for a regional client, when she appeared, her perfume arriving seconds before she did. "Isolde," she said with a sigh, glancing at my laptop as though spreadsheets were proof of my personal failures. "A woman your age should be preparing a nursery, not tax filings." I had stopped explaining long ago. Years of fertility appointments, whispered prayers, nights of silence had left me with no appetite for her judgment. But Celine's voice filled every room, gilded with Charleston refinement and sharpened by decades of entitlement. She still carried herself like the reigning queen of a society gala, though her throne was nothing more than the family's shipping firm and the fading echoes of its influence. I stood, stacking my files with a deliberate calm. "I have a meeting in 20 minutes. Please lock up when you leave." She ignored me, circling the kitchen like it was her domain. 8 years, Isolde. 8 years, and still no air. "Do you even try anymore?" The words slid under my skin, the same refrain repeated until it became a chant. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Upstairs, I heard Corbin's heavy steps. He would come down, offer his mother a tight smile, and let her poison settle into the walls. That was the rhythm of my days, her intrusion, his silence, and my slow erasure. And then the receipts began to appear. It started quietly, the way most unravelings do. Corbin came home late one Thursday night, muttering something about a client dinner near Broad Street. His tie hung loose, his hair slightly mussed, and he avoided my eyes as he set his briefcase by the door. I wanted to believe him. For a moment. I even did. But then the nights stacked one on top of the other Tuesdays, then Fridays, then nearly every evening, and the excuses blurred together like a rehearsed script. One Saturday morning, I found an envelope on the counter, addressed to him but opened. Inside was a credit statement with charges I couldn't ignore: a silk robe from a boutique on King Street, a platinum membership at a spa I'd never stepped foot in, dinners at restaurants where he had never taken me. My name wasn't on the account, but our home address was printed in bold at the top. I slipped the statement into a drawer and told myself I'd imagined the tightness in my chest. But the next week, while sorting through the kitchen trash, I saw shredded receipts that didn't match the life we lived together. I gathered the pieces, taped them back into place, and stared at the truth spelled out in ink jewelry, hotel stays, champagne. Then there was the perfume. Not mine. Never mine. I hadn't worn perfume in months, yet his shirts smelled faintly of jasmine, a sweetness that didn't belong in our home. I folded them for the laundry with shaking hands, the scent clinging like accusation. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I bought a small notebook and began to document. Photos of receipts, notes on his mileage, copies of the bank statements. Evidence, I told myself. A lifeline. If the time came when denial could no longer shield me. I never spoke of it to anyone, not even to my father, who would have seen through me in a heartbeat. I carried the weight alone, waiting for the moment when silence would no longer hold. That moment arrived with a call in the night. The phone rang at 2 a.m, its shrill sound tearing through the dark. For a moment, I thought it was a dream, until I saw Corbin's phone vibrating on his nightstand. He wasn't beside me. He hadn't been home at all. My hand shook as I answered. A woman's voice, high and unsteady, spilled through the line. "Are you Corbin's wife?" He collapsed. At the hotel downtown. They're taking him to Roper Hospital. His heart, he's critical. The line went dead before I could form words. I pulled on jeans and a sweater over my night clothes, keys rattling in my hand as I stumbled to the car. The streets of Charleston blurred beneath the glow of the lamps, empty and endless, the silence broken only by the pounding of my own heart. At the hospital, the air smelled of bleach and something colder. I gave his name at the desk, barely able to breathe when the nurse pointed me toward the ICU wing. The hallway seemed to stretch forever, fluorescent lights buzzing above me. I forced my steps forward, bracing myself for what I might find. Then I saw her. A young woman stood outside the ICU doors, tall, with smooth blonde hair that caught the sterile light. Her black dress was sleek, her heels too fine for the hour, and her mascara had bled into dark streaks across her face. She clutched a designer handbag as if it were the only thing holding her upright. Her eyes found mine and widened. She straightened, wiped at her face, and whispered, "You must be Isolde." I froze, every part of me going cold. "Who are you?" She swallowed, voice trembling but sure enough to cut through the air. "I'm Harper Vale, Corbin's fiancé, and I'm pregnant with his child." The words hollowed me out, leaving nothing but the echo of my own breath in the sterile hall. Behind the doors, machines beeped steadily, as if reminding me that his heart still beat, even as mine faltered, and then Celine's perfume filled the air. The first sign of Celine's arrival was the scent floral, sharp and suffocating, rolling down the ICU corridor before she even appeared. Harper stiffened, then lowered her head as though bracing for judgment, but judgment never came. Celine swept past me without acknowledgement, her heels clicking against the linoleum, her pearl necklace catching the cold light. When her eyes landed on Harper, she stopped, studied her with a sharpness that felt surgical, and then, to my shock, smiled. "You must be Harper," she said softly, her voice lined with triumph instead of anger. "Thank God. I was afraid our family's bloodline would end with Corbin." Harper's lips trembled, but she nodded. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and Celine gathered her into an embrace as if they were long-lost kin. "You're carrying our future," Celine whispered, loud enough for me to hear. I stood frozen, my body refusing to move, though everything inside me screamed. Corbin lay unconscious in a room just steps away, and here was his mother welcoming the woman who had replaced me. Behind Celine, Magnus appeared. He looked older than I remembered, his shoulders bent with the weight of years spent in her shadow. His eyes flicked to me briefly, full of something like apology, but he said nothing. Instead, he placed a hand on Celine's arm, a gesture of quiet support. No one looked at me. Not once. It was as though I were a ghost standing at the edge of my own life, watching roles being reassigned without consent. Wife was no longer my title. Harper had claimed it, and Celine had confirmed it. My place in this family had been erased in a single moment. The nurse called for immediate family to enter. Celine tightened her hold on Harper's arm and guided her forward, Magnus trailing behind. I remained in the hallway, my hands trembling at my sides. Through the glass, I saw Corbin's pale face surrounded by wires and machines. My reflection hovered in the pain like a stranger, blurred and fading. 2 days later, he was gone. Corbin never opened his eyes again. 2 days after the collapse, the machines in his room fell silent, and the monitors stilled. I sat at his bedside, watching the rise and fall of his chest slow until it stopped altogether. There were no final words, no chance for explanations, no acknowledgement of the years we had shared, only the sharp cry of a flatline and the sudden weight of absence. The following days blurred into condolence calls, paperwork, and hushed arrangements. I moved through it on autopilot, numb but raw. The funeral home smelled faintly of lilies and old wood, the air heavy with rehearsed sympathy. I wanted to disappear, but Celine would not allow it. She dominated the planning table as if it were her rightful throne, her pearls gleaming under the dim light of the director's office. "She must be included," Celine said firmly, her eyes locking on mine. "Harper belongs at the service. She carries Corbin's child. She carries our legacy." The words sliced through me, though her tone was clinical, like she was ordering flowers or choosing hymns. Magnus sat beside her, shoulders squared, jaw tight. He finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "It's about respect. Isolde. The Whitcomb name must be honored. Tradition demands it." I turned to him, searching for even a flicker of compassion, but he looked away, as though my grief was too inconvenient to meet. The funeral director glanced between us, his pen hovering, clearly uncomfortable. I realized then that no one would come to my defense. My role as wife had already been erased. My signature was needed, but my voice was not. "I don't agree." I managed, my throat raw, but Celine cut me off with a lift of her hand. "You'll do what's proper," she said. "What this family requires." The fury rose inside me, scorching hotter than the grief. Yet I swallowed it down, the taste bitter and metallic. To resist would only give Celine another chance to call me unworthy. To fight here, in this office, would not bring back the dignity I had already lost. So I nodded once, though my hands curled into fists in my lap. They mistook my silence for surrender. But inside, something shifted. The woman they had pushed to the edges of her own marriage was not gone. She was waiting, and when Celine insisted Harper sit in the front row, I no longer heard defeat. I heard the spark of something sharper. The final arrangements were made in the family parlor of the Whitcomb house. The same room lined with portraits of ancestors who stared down with cold, painted eyes. Celine sat at the head of the table, her voice clipped and decisive. "Harper will sit with us," she declared, as though she were announcing the order of service itself. "Front row, beside family." I lifted my head, meeting her gaze. "She is not family." Celine's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "She carries Corbin's child. That makes her more family than you ever managed to be." The words landed like a slap, and for a moment, the room spun. I steadied myself, willing my voice not to shake. "This is my husband's funeral. My place is beside him, not hers." Before I could continue, Magnus cleared his throat. His expression was tired, but his tone carried the weight of command. "Isolde, this isn't about personal feelings. It's about appearances. People will be watching. They'll expect us to act with grace. Let her sit with us for dignity's sake." Dignity. The word rang hollow. What dignity remained in being forced to share my grief with the woman who had mocked my marriage in secret, yet in that parlor, surrounded by the Whitcomb legacy? I realized there was no room for my voice. They had already decided. I pressed my hands together, my knuckles white, and gave a small nod. Outwardly, it looked like compliance. Inwardly, it was something else entirely. I would not fight them here. I would not give Celine the satisfaction of seeing me beg or break. If Harper was to sit in the front row, let the whispers begin. Let the glances fall like daggers. I would endure it, because my silence was not surrender. It was a storm gathering, biding its time. The service arrived too quickly, the chapel filled with flowers and whispers. And then Harper walked in, dressed like a queen in mourning. The chapel was heavy with flowers, their fragrance cloying, masking the salt of my tears. Corbin's casket rested at the front, draped in white lilies, the minister's voice droning over scripture that floated past me without meaning. I kept my head lifted, my back straight as the mourners filled the pews, whispers rustling through the vaulted space. Then Harper appeared. She swept in as though she were the widow herself, pearls glistening at her throat. Her black dress fitted to perfection, her hair arranged in soft waves that caught the light. On her arm hung that same designer bag I had once found listed on a receipt, and she wore grief-like theater, each tremble of her lip calculated for an audience. Celine rose at once, her hand firm around Harper's elbow. "This is Harper," she announced proudly, loud enough for all to hear. "She is carrying our grandchild. She belongs with us." Gasps rippled through the pews, heads turned, eyes darted to me. I felt the weight of every glance, every murmur. Still, I stood at the casket, my palms pressed flat against the polished wood, forcing myself not to flinch. The service passed in fragments, and soon we were in the reception hall beside the chapel. Crystal glasses clinked, voices lowered into uneasy conversations. I tried to endure the condolences, nodding mechanically, until Harper's voice rose behind me. "She deserved it," she said, laughter in her tone. 8 years and nothing. No children, no spark. She was just a placeholder. The words sliced clean through the room. I turned slowly. Harper stood with 2 women I didn't know, tossing her hair, smirking. Celine appeared beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You had 8 years. Isolde," she said to me, her voice carrying, "and nothing to show for it. Maybe Corbin just needed a real woman." The glass in someone's hand shattered to the floor. The hall erupted in whispers, sharp and stinging, like hornets circling prey. My knees weakened, my chest burned, and still I stood there, silent in my shame. And then a voice I knew better than my own cut through the noise. The room vibrated with whispers, my humiliation thick in the air. Harper's smirk lingered, Celine's hand still firm on her shoulder. I felt cornered, stripped of everything but the shallow breath I managed to draw. Then came a voice low, steady, unmistakable. "It's time someone told the truth about Harper Vale." The words cut through the noise like a blade. Conversations died mid-syllable. Glasses froze halfway to lips. The room turned as one. And there he stood in the doorway. My father, Silas Rennick, at 62. His hair had silvered, his back a little bent, but the authority he once carried as a Charleston detective had never left him. His jaw was set, his eyes sharp, and the weight of his presence was enough to still even Celine. Harper stiffened, the color draining from her face. She straightened her shoulders, but her trembling hands betrayed her composure. My father stepped forward, each movement deliberate, his gaze locked on Harper. "I knew I recognized you," he said, his voice calm but laced with steel. "Took a call this morning that confirmed it." Celine's hand slipped from Harper's arm. Magnus shifted uneasily, his eyes darting between them. The silence grew heavier, pressing against the walls, as though the city itself held its breath. Harper opened her mouth, then shut it again, her lips working soundlessly. For the first time, her performance cracked. My father stopped a few feet from her, his presence filling the space where my dignity had been stripped away minutes earlier. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. His words carried like a verdict delivered in open court. "This woman isn't who she claims to be." Every gaze in the room fixed on him, and for the first time that day, the shame no longer belonged to me. The truth was finally at the door, and it was about to step inside. My father's eyes never left Harper as the silence thickened around us. Then, with the steadiness of a man who had built a career on exposing half-truths, he spoke. "Her name isn't Harper Vale. Not legally. She's still married to Thomas Jameson, a veteran, a man who lives right here in West Ashley." Gasps rippled through the room. Harper's face went chalk white. She shook her head quickly. words tumbling out. That's not true. We're separated. It's complicated. But the back doors of the hall opened, and a tall man in a leather jacket strode in. His presence silenced the room all over again. TJ. My father said simply. The man's jaw was hard, his steps direct as he reached the table at the front. He dropped a folder onto the polished wood, papers spilling out. Financial records, he said. My bank account, drained. Divorce papers she never filed. And this. He held up a small recorder, pressing play. Her voice filled the room, grainy but unmistakable. I faked the pregnancy. The Whitcombs are loaded. Once he's gone, they'll believe anything I tell them. The sound of it was unbearable. Celine staggered back, her hand clutching at a chair for balance. Magnus closed his eyes, his face a mask of shame. Harper's composure shattered. She lunged for the papers, her words breaking into panicked sobs. You don't understand, he was leaving her. He loved me. But no one moved to help. The crowd stepped away as though her lies were contagious. She turned, eyes wild, and bolted for the door, her heels striking the tile in frantic staccato. The last glimpse I had of her was a blur of silk and desperation before the doors slammed shut behind her. The room exhaled, the whispers swelling into disbelief, and in the wreckage of truth, silence finally settled over the Whitcombs. The hall emptied slowly, guests slipping away in uneasy silence, leaving only the Whitcombs and me among the scattered chairs and wilting flowers. Celine sat rigid, her pearls askew, staring at nothing. Magnus approached me, his steps heavy, his voice lower than I had ever heard it. I'm sorry, Isolde, he said, his hand hovering as though unsure if he had the right to touch my shoulder. You didn't deserve any of this. I nodded once, unable to summon words. For the first time, his eyes held something other than distance. They held shame. Celine finally looked at me, her voice trembling. I was wrong. 3 words. No explanation. No plea for forgiveness. Just an admission so quiet it barely reached me. Then she turned away. The weeks that followed moved in unfamiliar quiet. The phone stopped buzzing with Celine's intrusions. The house no longer carried Corbin's scent, and I let myself breathe again. I returned to work, to the rhythm of numbers and order, to mornings where the only sound was the gulls over the harbor. But life still had one more turn waiting. I couldn't keep down my coffee one morning, the bitterness turning my stomach in ways I couldn't ignore. A test at the pharmacy confirmed it with 2 lines sharp as ink strokes. My doctor's calm smile sealed it. I was pregnant. I sat in the car afterward, hand pressed to my stomach, staring out at Charleston's cobblestones bathed in sunlight. Corbin had left me with betrayal, with silence, with emptiness. Yet, within me, there was something new, something untainted by him or his family's demands. For the first time in years, the legacy I carried was mine alone.